What's going on, everyone? We are back. We're outside. That's right. We are in our first phase of getting out of lockdown here in Singapore. Nonetheless, we're allowed to film. That's why I'm here to talk to you about a camera, finally, that I've been waiting to review. I've been waiting for a while. Unfortunately, there is no sports happening, no zoo. So, yeah, this camera I might not be able to show you everything that this camera can do, but you'll get the gist of it by the end of this review. Anyway, we're here to talk about the Sony A9 II, along with three lenses, the 135 1.8, the 100 to 400, and the 200 to 600. Like all our reviews, we are not paid or sponsored unless we tell you. With that, let's talk about the A9 II. Now, this camera is an evolution, not a revolution, compared to the original A9. Now, that camera was fantastic then, it is still fantastic today, and the A9 has done some updates to it, but for the most part, is basically an A9 Plus. Let's go over some of the differences. Now, one of the big changes in the camera is, of course, the hand grip, the body design. Now, a lot of people out there always complain about the Sony Alpha series being a little bit small in the hands. The A7R4 came out, Sony addressed it with that camera. That design is now in the A9 II. I have larger hands. I really like the grip. Now, also, you've got a new battery grip on this as well because it has to fit the larger hand grip. So with these together, this is one great feeling camera in the hand. I have to say, Sony's done a tremendous job with it. Also, there's been improved weather sealing on it, so you've got that. If you want to go out in the more rougher terrains, you're going to have no problems with that with the A9 II. Updated processor inside of it. You still got that fast electronic shutter, 20 frames per second in electronic shutter mode, and then you've got 10 frames per second in mechanical shutter. It's not class leading. The 1DX Mark III does top it in terms of speed, but honestly speaking, with the 20 frames per second in electronic shutter mode, and there's no warping or no distortion, you gotta hand it to Sony. They've done a tremendous job with this. Also, the color science has improved on this, and it's a welcome change. Honestly, when I'm editing photos now and I'm editing skin tones, I don't have to do so much to it, so applaud Sony for that. 2 UHS 2 card slots now. You don't have that Duo or that memory stick card slot that nobody ever used. Like 5 years. Sony was like married to that thing. They finally let it go. They had a divorce. They brought in UHS 2 with this camera. Now, I have not a problem with it, but I wish there was something a little bit different. I'll talk about that later on in the review, but at least you have 2 UHS 2 card slots in this. You've got 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi capabilities, an Ethernet port in it. If you ever want to use those things, you might not ever touch it, but it's there in the camera if you need it. And you got a slightly better battery life. And that's essentially the A9 II, an evolution, not a revolution, but a very solid camera. Now, let's talk about lenses. First, let's talk about my favorite daily lens from Sony now. It's officially the 135 1.8 FEGM lens. I mean, I've been wanting to test this lens, I think, since it ever launched. And it's been challenging. To be frank with you, it's been very challenging to get it from Sony Singapore. I think they just don't have a lot of copies or whatever it is. I had to sell my kidney, honestly. It's on eBay right now if you want to help me out. That's why I got this lens. I'm joking, of course. But I finally got it in my hands, and I understand why people love this lens so much. It is biting sharp. This is Sony at their best. And, you know, I'm used to using the 24-70, the 16-35, and then 70-200. All good lenses in their own right. This lens, Sony, keep making this kind of lens. First off, you've got a faster autofocus motor inside of it. You've got 13 elements, 10 groups. It's 950 grams. Not the lightest lens on the market, but it feels really good on the A9 II. 82 millimeter for the filter diameter on this as well. And yeah, it's pricey. It's expensive, but it's a beautiful prime, the 135 1.8, beautiful portraiture, stunning, blows out the background, annihilates it. Everything on this lens is fantastic. Now, obviously, the 135 is not a lens that you're going to use like all the time, right? I mean, because it is a longer focal length, unless you shoot like that all the time. But if you really want to see the capability of what Sony can do with their GM lenses, check out the 135. It is a stellar lens. And for those who own it, of course, you know what I'm talking about. For those who haven't, go try it out. Trust me. Next, let's talk about the Sony 100 to 400. Now, let's say you need a lens longer than a 70 to 200 and you want some range in there. Try out the 100 to 400 at 4.5 to 5.6 OSSG master lens by Sony. Now this lens is a very good all-around zoom lens for what it's designed for. Now, it's not the sharpest lens in Sony's lineup, but it does a very good job. Now, you do have optical steady shot in this, so you're gonna get that image stabilization inside the lens as well with the body, so you're gonna be really covered in that regard. One of the things I did notice about, of course, is you do have that telescopic zoom here, which some people love, some people hate. Personally, I wish it was all internal, but it is what it is. But I think for a lot of photographers out there that just need something a little bit longer than that 70 to 200, this is gonna be a very good option for you. Now let's talk about what is inside of this lens. You have 22 elements, 16 groups. The weight of this lens is 1,395 grams. So it's not a light lens. You got a tripod ring here, which is non-removable, so you are good to go in that regard. It's a good all-around lens. I mean, it's not a wow lens, but I think it's a good workhorse for you if you need a 400mm lens and you don't want to spend so much money on a much faster lens out there. I think the 100 to 400 is a very good option for you. But I will say that if you want to shoot low light with this lens, I would be very careful about that because, of course, at 5.6 at 400mm, it's not the fastest lens. Lower light means higher ISO. You might run into some issues if you need a very sharp shot. But if you're shooting bright daylight, no issues at all. This lens can really do the job for you. Now, let's move on to my favorite zoom lens from Sony, the 200 to 600. Now we're here to talk about my favorite daily street lens. This is where I walk the streets and I shoot with this. Don't you? You don't walk around with the 200 to 600? You are missing out. Let me tell you something. Nobody's gonna yell at you for taking their photo because you have to be so far back they'll never see you. Try it sometime. Kidding. The 200 to 600 5.6 to 6.3 OSSG lens. Now, this is a small lens, right? It's quite small. I mean, considering it's a 200 to 600, it's actually not too bad, but it's quite beefy. But I have to say, for usability-wise, this lens really fits the bill for a lot of people out there that don't want to buy a 600 prime, even though the 600 f4 is a phenomenal lens. You are really limited at 600. You have to really know what you're going to use that lens for and be very specific. But if you're going to be doing any kind of sports or any kind of wildlife or anything that's going to require moving around and the subject that's going to be moving, you do want a zoom lens. And that's where the 200 to 600 comes into play. Now, this is not the fastest lens in Sony's lineup. Of course, it's a 5.6 to 6.3. This is a daylight lens. I can shoot low light, but again, ISO is going to be creeping up, so it will impede performance a little bit. But overall, I have to say, the image quality out of this is not bad at all. Let's talk about what is inside of this lens. You got 24 elements, 17 groups. The weight of this is 2,115 grams. Easy to carry around, right? Just get a battery grip. With any of these zoom lenses, please invest in a battery grip. If not, you're really going to be struggling because while the grip has improved on the A9 II, they're not designed to be used with a lens like this walking around. That's why there is a tripod mount here available. It is non-removable, but it is there and you will definitely need to use it. In terms of autofocusing speed though, it is relatively quick. I have no issues in terms of performance. I haven't been able to test it out in any type of sports because unfortunately, as I mentioned before, we're still in lockdown mode, no sports, no entertainment, no zoo. But I mean, from my experience testing the autofocusing system on various different lenses, it's not the fastest and it's not the slowest, but it is a very solid performer. And I think that if you are the type of photographer that needs a very good zoom, definitely check this out. It comes in at a very good price point as well. Even though it doesn't have that orange G master to it, you still have some fantastic image quality to this lens. Now, talked enough about the lenses, let's go into Lightroom and let's take a look at the image quality coming out of these three lenses. All right, now we are in Lightroom taking a look at some of the images I've taken with the A9 II. Now, as I mentioned before in this review, no sporting events, no wildlife events. We are still in lockdown mode here. So I did get some pictures of my friend Terrence cycling and some random cyclists, some people exercising and some lifestyle shots, just to kind of give you an idea of the image quality of the A9 II paired with these three lenses. First, let's look at the 135 1.8. Here's a shot of my friend Terrence. We shot this in bright sunlight, and I'll show you the before image just to give you an idea of how bright it was. Now, this is a great image. I mean, it's sharp. Look at the separation from the background. This is really something. And I shot this at 1.8 ISO 100, 1/4000th of a second. So, I mean, I was really pushing this camera because this is what it looked like outside. As you can tell, see how bright it was? Yes. So, if I was to get this lens on my own accord, I would definitely get an ND filter for it if you want to shoot outdoors. Here's a couple other shots of Terrence in some various different poses. Here's some great action shots as well. He was riding towards me, burst mode, tracking. It just nailed it. I mean, he's gritting his teeth. He's into the ride. It's a fantastic shot. Really happy with it. And as you can tell, just moving through this, it doesn't lose focus at all. Now, the tracking on this camera is really good. Is it 100%? No. All cameras out there will have a hits and misses here and there. But I can tell you, I got way more hits than misses. So do not worry about that at all. If you are doubting Sony's capabilities on tracking, don't be. It's a fantastic camera for that, especially for sports. Okay, now let's look at some other photos with the 135 1.8. This is some architecture shots I've taken. This is the Esplanade here in Singapore. This is a theater venue. It's got a very interesting design and shape to it. We call it a durian here because, as you can see, the panels, they've got this triangular sharp look to them. And this is what it looks like actually if you look onto the side. And with the 135, you would think that might not be a great lens for architecture, but you can really kind of capture details in a building. And as you can see, if I punch in on that, look how sharp that is. That is fantastic. ISO 100, 135, 1/4000th of a second. Here is the Art Science Museum. Again, this is ISO 100. Look at the sharpness on this. Fantastic. Look at the building, the reflections there. It's really a solid lens. So now let's move on to the 100 to 400. Now this copy of the lens that I have, I am going to be very careful in how I talk about it because I did notice that I was not getting 100% sharp images when the camera was saying it was locked on focus. My shutter speed was fine, everything was fine. I did talk to Sony. They said it could be a bad copy. This is a demo lens and it has gotten banged around a little bit, but I'll give you an idea what I'm talking about here. I'm over 1/1000th of a second at 400 millimeters of f5.6 at ISO 500. This should not be the case, right? This should be bitingly sharp. So I'm gonna say this might be a lens issue. But when I drop it down to 175, things get a little bit sharper, as you can tell by this face. It's not 100%, but it's not too bad at all. That was 1/328th of a second on that. So I should be good to go for the most part. I did get this bird perched on a pole here. I mean, is this 100% sharp? No, but it will be fine for social media and likes that. But as you can see, there's a lot of, I don't know what this is going on the lens. So I'm not going to judge this lens too much. I'm just going to give you an idea of the potential that it has. But yeah, this shot turned out really well on the beak. Not too bad. A little bit of noise there. ISO 6400, 300 millimeters, 5.6 at 1600th of a second. Again, because these birds move around so quick, I really had to, work with that shutter speed a bit more than I wouldn't necessarily want to. I got it, but I have noise as a result. And that's kind of the 100 to 400. Again, it's not my favorite zoom lens. Now, maybe it's my copy of the lens that I have, but let's talk about the 200 to 600. Now, this lens is a very sharp lens for what it is. Now, unfortunately, though, with a 5.6 to 6.3 aperture, this lens means it's not going to work well in low light situations. I'll show you that in just a second. But here's a couple of shots of a dog. I shot this over at 600 millimeters, at 6.3, 1/500th of a second, sharp, happy. Look at that, beautiful. This is in color. Here's another shot of a dog looking through the window. Again, I'm just testing out the image quality on this lens, but look at the detail. You can see the water coming off the hairs here. This is a fantastic lens. And it's not a G master lens, it's just a G lens, but it really does produce some great images. Now here's some tracking shots of a random guy cycling as he's going through. Again, if I would show you every single shot when you're going 20 frames per second, it can look a little bit mundane, but just to give you an idea. And look at this. ISO 250, it's 6.3500ths of a second. So yeah, this is the downside when you're using a lens with this slow of aperture, is that you really need bright lights. You really need to be in the optimal situation. Otherwise, you really are gonna have to crank up the ISO And unfortunately, that means that you are going to get some noise in your image, but this is very, very usable. Let's look at some other images here. I mean, this is just a lifestyle shot of a father and daughter cycling through and My Little Pony backpack. And yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful little image. It captures a moment and it works well. And the image quality out of this lens is fantastic. But now let's talk about what it looks like in low light situations. As I mentioned before, 6.3, I'm pushing out to 600 millimeters. It's going to be a stretch. Look at this. Now, there has been some corrections on this. Let me just give you an idea. I did a lot of corrections on this. And you can see the color temperature. Now, for some reason on the Sony, and I don't know if it's the lens or what it is, it likes to shift to blue quite a bit. And that's not what I was seeing when I was out there, but that's the original. And as you can see, there's a lot of noise on that. But of course, if I just bring it back, then I still have noise, but I've got a little bit more detail. Again, if I go back to the information on this image, it's ISO 12,800, 600 millimeters, f6.3 at 1/500th of a second. You'll definitely need a tripod with this lens. I was doing this all handheld, but again, I wouldn't push it beyond 12,800 for an image if you want to do anything with work related, because you can see the noise on that. And that's with noise reduction on, because without it, you can see a lot of the grain there. So this comes at a less expensive price point, but you do sacrifice that low light capabilities with this. Here's just a couple other shots here, kind of give you an idea. See the noise in the sky here. Again, trying my best to alleviate it with some editing, but it's just really hard to do. So this lens is meant for daylight. And that's pretty much the performance on the A9 II with these three lenses. The 135 1.8 is a fantastic lens. The 100 to 400, again, I think my copy might be a little bit bad, so I don't want to get in too detail with it. And the 200 to 600 is a fantastic lens in the right lighting situation. And it brings me to my final thoughts on the A9 II. Now, obviously, as I mentioned before, this is an evolution from the original A9, and they didn't really need to upgrade the A9 that much because it was already a camera, you could say in some ways, ahead of its time. One of the improvements I wish were on the A9 II is the EVF. Now, it's the same as the A9, which is a 3.69 million dot EVF. That is industry standard for the most part, but the A7R4 has a much higher resolving EVF, and it looks fantastic. And I wish it was in this camera. Reason being, if this camera is geared for more sports and wildlife photographers out there, you want to see the sharpest and clearest image possible. That's why a lot of photographers still opt for the optical viewfinder for that reason alone. It would have been nice to have it in this. It's not a deal breaker, but if you're talking about improvements, that's one improvement I wish it was inside this camera. Another is in regards to the card slots. Now, yes, you have two UHS 2 card slots in this, but again, a sports camera, if you're going to shoot a lot of shots in sequence, you want a card that can hold that kind of data transfer. It can do well, right? It's going to hold, the buffering is pretty decent. It would have been nice to see an XQD or CF Express card slot inside of this, at least one. So you could opt to have that card and use the UHS 2 as a backup, or whatever the case, however you want to shoot. Because a CF Express card or XQD card is so much faster. And as we saw on, let's say, the 1DX Mark III review, that's one of the biggest attributes of that camera is just you can shoot for an hour and you're not going to have any issues with buffering whatsoever. And especially when, again, every photo could be a money shot, you want to make sure that you don't miss it because of a buffering issue. Besides that, though, I really enjoyed using the A9 II. It's just, I love the improvements that Sony's done on it. Of course, the grip is one of the biggest improvements. It feels like a much sturdier camera overall. You know, the menu system is slightly improved, the color science is slightly improved. All these little improvements have made the A9 a very enjoyable camera out there. And I've been one to really criticize Sony when I feel that they haven't hit the mark, but I think they really did on the A9 II. We missed out on the Olympics, of course, and all those big sporting events this year. We might see that in the tail end of the year, and I'm sure a lot of you are going to get back to work very soon if you're in the US and in Europe. So this might be a camera that you might want to consider, especially if you're looking to go into mirrorless and want something that, you know, is going to last you for a little longer. This A9 II might be an option for you. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the camera and the lenses. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you agree with me? Do you have any other opinion? I'd love to hear from you. Like always, follow us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube. Be safe out there, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.